All right, Small Business Administration Administrator Kelly Loeffler and a former Georgia senator. Thanks for joining us here on 11 Alive.
Great to be with you, Zach. Excited to be back home in Georgia.
We always appreciate seeing you, of course, on 11 Alive and talking to you for the Georgia vote. We're in the midst of a bit of gridlock in D.C. right now. You lead the Small Business Administration. What's the SBA's stance on this shutdown?
Well, Zach, we're today, as we speak, at historic levels of shutdown for this country. We've never had more than 35 days of a shutdown, and we're also on roughly the one-year anniversary of President Trump's historic election. And, you know, it kind of tells us two things. First of all, Senate Democrats can't accept the fact that President Trump won this election decisively in a landslide election, winning every swing state. And secondly, that they will do anything that they can to obstruct this government, including hurting the American people, using them for leverage. And certainly at the SBA, we're seeing the impact of that on small businesses across this country in so many ways, anecdotally and in the data. And the evidence is very clear. The shutdown is hurting the American people.
Let me ask you a question. We have asked many Republicans and many Democrats at this point, in no small part because we've had more than a month to have these conversations now. But I want to ask you this. From where you stand, what is the path out of this shutdown?
It's very simple. Senate Democrats just need to vote to reopen the government. They voted 14 times so far to keep the government closed. That includes Georgia's U.S. senators, what does that mean to the American people? Well, to our military, it means that they're not going to get paychecks. To our air traffic controllers, they've now gone 2 pay periods with no pay. To our Capitol Police in Washington, who stand outside the Senate Democrats' gilded dining room where they're having lunch, continuing to get paid, those police officers are not getting paid. So what we're seeing is a complete ignorance of how this is affecting the country. And at the small business level, let's just look at where we came from. We came off a record year in 2025. We roll into the shutdown. Now 320 small businesses every single day in this country are not able to close on $170 million of financing. And that really matters in an economy where small businesses create 2 out of every 3 new jobs in America.
People look to Congress and the Senate in particular as a place where compromise happens. Maybe perhaps not so much as they did in generations past, but that's still what's supposed to happen in Congress. Both parties, if they've been consistent on anything, have been consistent in blaming the other side for the fault of this shutdown. But I wonder, for your thoughts on this, is there anything Republicans should compromise on to get a deal done to reopen the government?
Well, look, the Republicans voted to reopen the government back in September. So when we think about compromise, this is something the Republicans have done time and again under the Biden administration, passing CR after CR, though they were not happy with the policies. And let's just think about what were those policies. It was open borders, 20 million illegal aliens crossing into this country that cost American taxpayers billions and billions of dollars, risked lives of people, some of the criminal acts, the fentanyl coming across the border, yet Republicans kept the government open. So instead of having a resistance, they maintained regular order. Republicans didn't like the Green New Deal. We sure didn't like the 20% plus inflation due to the rampant spending of Democrats, but yet we kept the government open. So Republicans have compromised time and again, and all we're asking is get back to regular order so that we can run the government and do the business of the government for the American people.
Democrats are not there's no Democratic elected official in the room right now, but if they were, I'm sure they would say, listening to you, that it's on Republicans to come to the table and negotiate on health care. In particular, Democrats have pushed consistently for an extension of Affordable Care Act subsidies. They're currently set to expire at the end of the year. Do Republicans have an obligation to negotiate on that?
Well, Zach, there's so much there. First of all, the COVID era extension was set by Democrats to expire on December 31st. And now they're asking Republicans to bail them out of their own legislation. Look, it's Senate Democrats that broke Obamacare, healthcare with Obamacare. And so time and again, we have seen this healthcare system buckle under Obamacare with premiums rising 80%. since 2014. That's all come on the back of hardworking Americans. And so what Republicans are saying is, we would love to have these conversations, but we're not going to have them in a smoke-filled back room with 4 people cutting a deal that isn't good for the American people. And it's very clear that these premiums were set to rise no matter what. So the extension of the tax credits accounts for a single-digit percentage of the increase that was already coming to Obamacare. So look, Republicans have been very clear, open the government and let's talk about health care. It's really important.
I'm sure there's some people who would be listening and they're going to nod their heads and agree with that. I know, and I think you would acknowledge as well, there will be others who may take issue, and they may say that the House that's under Republican control is out of session. They've been in recess for pushing on 5-6 weeks at this point. They may see that as an indication, rightly or wrongly, but some people may see the fact that the House is still not in session as an indicator that Republicans don't want to negotiate on this issue yet. Do they have a point when they say that?
Well, first of all, the House has done their job. They did it on a bipartisan basis. They want to open the government. So here's what we're seeing is Speaker Johnson every day holding a press conference saying, these are the stakes, this is where we're at. Please come to the table, Senate Democrats. So the House has done their job. But look, this is about health care for 20 million people, if we want to be real specific here. If they really cared about your health care, they would care about the jobs of millions and millions of people that are being impacted. The 50 million Americans who either get WIC or SNAP, so women, infants, and children and food stamps programs. So the trade-off seems really unfair to those families that are going hungry, to those small businesses that are closing, to the air traffic controllers, our military, and our federal police that aren't getting paid. So if Democrats really cared about health care, they would care about our jobs, our families, our security across this country.
I'm glad you bring up the cost issue, because I want to read something that I read recently and get your thoughts on it. According to the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, which is a nonpartisan, nonprofit group, they say that it would cost about $60 billion to extend these ACA subsidies for 2 years. Now, that's a lot of money, but compared to a federal budget that is many trillions of dollars, it's a relatively small amount. Would it be that difficult to extend these subsidies?
Well, I certainly don't want to negotiate on behalf of the House and Senate. That's going to be up to them what they determine is the right spending level. But if you look at the overall impact of this shutdown on the economy, obviously it dwarfs that impact. And just think about the CEA estimate, the Council of Economic Advisors put out data that said over a month this shutdown could cost 43,000 jobs across this country, $15 billion a week in economic activity. So that's $60 billion right there in economic activity. So if Democrats were really concerned about health care, they would see that the costs that they're having to this country are enormous and that they could reopen the government. But they've been pretty clear. They've moved the goalposts every time on reopening the government. First, it was for the No Kings, We Hate America rally. Second, it was for, we need to have this SNAP deadline pass and make families feel that pain and so we can have leverage in reopening. And then they said, well, we need to get through elections. Now they've gotten through elections and they've said, well, this worked out pretty well for us. We won blue seats in blue states. Let's just keep the government closed. So the goalposts are moving. It's never enough for the far left. And that's why you're starting to see congressional Democrats drop out of races because they can't get far enough left for their own party, for their base.
You brought up a lot there. I want to dwell here on something you just said. You've accused Democrats of trying to make people feel the pain of SNAP benefits being at risk of not being dispersed. Democrats, including Senator Raphael Warnock here in Georgia, have accused Republicans of doing that. The same accusations now going both ways. Some Democrats accuse Republicans, accuse the White House, accuse President Trump of dragging their feet on following court orders to disperse SNAP benefits from the contingency fund. Do they have a point when they say that?
They do not. They voted 14 times to keep the government closed and to withhold SNAP, WIC, payment to our military, some services for veterans. At the SBA, we had to cancel our 12th annual Veterans Small Business Day, celebrating our 1.6 million small business owners of veterans. But look, what they're trying to cover up is that they're the ones keeping the government shut down. And we have families now going hungry because they simply will not vote to reopen the government and have a discussion about where we should go with health care and any other number of policies. It's not just health care that's not getting discussed. There's real needs. I mean, there's the Defense Authorization Act that they tried to bring up that Senate voted down. The Senate Democrats voted down because they don't want to pay our military. So these issues aren't just singular issues. They're affecting the entire country. And they have been very clear that they're doing this to get leverage, and they're using Americans' pain to get leverage.
In past shutdown conversations, the president has played a pretty prominent role in trying to broker a deal, of being really at the center, the pivot point of negotiations. At least publicly, we haven't seen as much of that from President Trump through this saga so far. You're in the cabinet. Where is the president on this ongoing shutdown debate?
Well, I think the president was very clear at our cabinet meeting that came within about a week of the shutdown. And we talked about this very openly. It was clear that Democrats were going to exact as much pain out of the American people as they could. And the president said, we can do two things. We can make this painless, or we can make it painful. He instructed all of us to make it as painless as possible. And that was his commitment to getting the troops paid, not once, but twice. Now another payday is coming up. They may miss that because we are truly running out of funding. They've made a partial payment on WIC, being able to find some of the funding. But what's happening is completely at the hands of Senate Democrats. The president wants this country open. He wants to minimize the pain. He's asked all of us to do that.
And I hate to cut you off, but the president and some folks in his administration have also openly talked about ratcheting up the pain on blue seats, blue districts, blue cities in the country.
Well, we have a situation where funding has been cut off in the government. There's something called the Anti-Deficiency Act. You can't spend money we don't have. The government has not been funded because Senate Democrats will not fund the government right now. And so we're having to make very hard decisions. You saw recently FAA. They may have to cut back 10% of flights starting this week, which will obviously be very disadvantageous to flyers and pilots and air traffic. But this is what's happening. We're all bearing the cost of this, and it's at the hands of Senate Democrats.
Let me ask you two last questions here. We always want to be respectful of your time, but we are a month plus into the shutdown, so there's a lot to discuss. I want to read you something, and I want to get your thoughts on it. A fellow Republican, a fellow conservative Republican here in Georgia, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, has emerged in recent weeks as a vocal critic of this shutdown. She has blamed Democrats for the situation, but also criticized Republicans and Republican leadership, saying Republican leadership does not have a plan to address the health care question. How do you respond to her criticism of your party?
Well, look, I think it's up to every representative, every congressperson to represent their district, and that's what this is about. But certainly we have a lot of differing views on our side, as they do on the Democrat side. But what my role is to advocate for the American people who are being hurt, particularly in small businesses, which make up 99% of all businesses right here in Georgia. In fact, let me just tell you, every week of this shutdown, about 50 small businesses are not getting their SBA loans. They're not getting millions and millions, $35 million to hire, invest, and grow. And I know that all of our congressmen and women, that our senators should care about that, because those are Main Street jobs, those are Main Street families. That's what my focus is right now, and I think we have to continue to make sure people know the impacts of this, that we have to reopen the government, and then we're going to have a conversation about policy. Because first of all, you've seen some very good policies on healthcare come out of this administration. President Trump with the Most Favored Nations Act on pharmaceutical pricing. We're having some of the biggest rollbacks in pharmaceutical pricing in the history of this country. That's just one example.
Let's end here. And I in some ways, it's a place we started, but I think it's worth revisiting. You're a conservative Republican in President Trump's cabinet. I don't think a lot of people are going to be surprised to hear you pointing the finger at Democrats for the bulk of the blame for this shutdown. I don't think anybody was surprised when they've seen Democrats we've interviewed pointing the finger at Republicans. If there's been one consistency through this entire saga, this record-setting saga, it has been both parties placing all the blame on the other. Is there anything, any inch of daylight, any inch of movement that you think your party should make to help get a deal done? I think there are a lot of voters who are looking at this and kind of want to throw their hands up in the air and say, just get a deal done and reopen the government.
Well, I think Leader Thune is doing it in the Senate. He's reaching out to moderate Democrats in the Senate, asking if they can come over and have conversations. I heard just yesterday that Minority Leader Schumer was not allowing that to happen. So I know that those conversations are happening. I've been in the Senate. I know there's quiet conversations that happen all the time. That's the nature of the Senate. But that's simply not being allowed now that they've moved the goalposts again to make it about politics. And as I mentioned, the resistance to the Trump agenda is much broader than healthcare or any other issue. This is about refusing to return to regular order and saying we're going to resist this as long as we can. It's having real impacts on the lives of all Americans, regardless of political affiliation, and it's all on the backs of this political gambit that Chuck Schumer's trying to play for the Democrats.
I think earlier you said, and I'm paraphrasing, but you said we can have a conversation about policy, but only after the government is reopened.
That's right.
The big policy question right now is these ACA subsidies. If a viewer's watching this, would it be fair for them to think, and I want to ask you this, if the government is reopened, if the CR is approved, if the government is reopened, do Republican leaders promise to get a deal done on ACA subsidies before the end of the year?
I think Republicans have been very clear. Yes, we will have those conversations.
But will they get a deal done?
Well, I can't commit to the moves of the legislative branch, but they'll certainly have the conversations, just as happened during the Biden administration when there were policies that Republicans did not like, open borders, Green New Deal, rampant wasteful spending that created massive Biden inflation. But we still kept the government open. We had those conversations. So I think it's common sense is going to prevail. Certainly, I've said many times that the same common sense that prevails on Main Street needs to prevail in Washington. And it would be great to get the government reopened so we can have those conversations. And the sooner we can talk about that, the more likely it is we get to a deal, because we're coming up really fast on year end.
Always a lot to talk about in this always evolving political landscape in Georgia and all around the country. Administrator Kelly Loeffler, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Zach. Great to be with you.